Hi everyone, and welcome to my updated rapid fire rogue guide for season 4. Now that the mid-season patch is out, this build has received a pretty substantial improvement thanks to the behavior change of the Scoundrel's Kiss ring. So this is what makes this build. This is a unique ring that was introduced in season 4, but then had some issues, some bugs, and well, now it's fully functional again, and it's a blast to play. So I've been working on this in the last few days, after trying out the Twisting Blades as well, which is also formidable. And we have Rapid Fire actually ranked in S tier on our max soul tier list. So it's up here. It's a very powerful build that deletes bosses, that can push pretty high. You see me here. This is actually not optimized setup yet. I have some of my items not even masterworked at all in these kind of things. And I'm kind of cruising through 119 here on hardcore right now. That was just a random run of the highest tier I was able to open at that point, because I had just unlocked 119. And even here, I can sometimes 1 or 2 rotate elite packs in just seconds, basically. So the damage burst is incredible on this build. On a staggered boss, I'm able to consistently reach something like 500 million or so in a single combo, because you fire 10 arrows and all of those get doubled. So you get 20 arrows, and each of them sometimes hitting for like 10, 20, even 30 million I've seen. Potentially more sometimes on a really good hit, so it can get pretty wild. And on top of this, the setup is actually fairly tanky, because there's a lot of extra defenses you can put in there. We have a few defensive aspects, lots of life on the Paragons, lots of life you can even put on your gear. In general, I felt pretty safe, and you can also play this at range. You don't have to play like very close range, so whenever there's a dangerous situation, you can play around that, which is an advantage over some other builds that rogues currently have. So all in all, this is a great package, and I was actually able to farm also like 100 plus pretty consistently and pretty quickly with this. So it definitely rivals some of the other top builds out there for the rogues, and it just feels all around much better to play. So here's one of such examples of a speedrun, for example, on 101. So I was just like trying this out here, the same character, after I completed at 119. And well, you see here I can consistently one-tap elite packs on this tier, even on a higher tier, but 101 felt kind of comfortable. And right now there's not much of a reason to go higher, because the Neve Iron increases are not really high after 101. But you see here I can basically one-tap entire packs, and it's very consistent damage output. This is like one thing I really like about this setup. You have this AoE burst, all of the arrows land in one place, and they consistently do a very similar amount of damage, basically. Which is why it feels so good to play this, because you know you fire your free combo points with your precision stacks, and you will annihilate that elite pack on a certain tier. So this is really cool about it. It's not like, for example, in Andariel's rogue, where you have to wait for the proc, and then you have to wait maybe for a second proc, and then you can run away, and you have to always like pay attention. Do you actually trigger, or you know, how much damage do you do? Here it's always the same, basically. So I love that about this build. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward combo point setup with precision. So the idea is that you use puncture 3 times and then follow up with a rapid fire. We run cold imbuement to boost our damage against, for example, staggered bosses. As you can see here right now, I can literally 2-tap these guys on 101, for example. This is like over 1 billion life, 1.5 billion life, depending on the boss. And they just die in 2, maybe 3 rapid fires. So this is based on a lot of crowd control damage. And other than that, just the typical like crit synergies that rogues offer. So let's go into the planner here. I have actually taken another look at this and updated it for this patch. So there were some tweaks I have been doing. So let's go A to Z here. Now, the main combo here is the rapid fire, as I just explained. If we play with precision passive, this gives us a guaranteed crit after stacking this 4 times. You can get those stacks by using a marksman basic attack, in this case puncture. Puncture allows us to slow enemies, get a bit of resources, proc, for example, also stuff like innovation or some of our tempers. For example, chance to mobilize, chance to freeze, chance to stun, chance to daze. Lots of good stuff here. And like this, we basically never run out of resources, because we spend very little, because we always do 3 punctures and then 1 rapid fire. Rapid fire costs baseline 25 energy, and you can kind of expect to just get all of that energy back just from innovation whenever you do that combo. So that's really helpful, and you never run low on resources. Then we have those position stacks. You need to get at least 1 crit in those 3 punctures that you do. So this build does stack a little bit of crit chance to guarantee, or nearly guarantee at least, to get those 4 position stacks after 3 punctures. So you see here, for example, the setup right now has 32 crit chance, which makes it very comfortable and very consistent. And there is almost never a situation where you don't get those 4 position stacks after 3 punctures. So this is kind of the bread and butter here. We stack a lot of crit damage to boost this passive. So we have this on basically all of our items. We temper crit damage everywhere as well. Crit damage is very powerful for this setup. And a little bit of crit chance. You don't really go all in because you actually have the guaranteed crit from precision. You just need to get a little bit of crit chance, basically. And then we run the combo points. So we have a few synergies of that. For example, we have the expectant aspect here. So you do 3 combo points, you get this 30% buff. Perfect. Then we also have, for example, a bunch of extra attack speed. Here's the rapid aspect, here's the moonrise aspect, and here's the accelerating aspect. We actually get a lot of attack speed here, just on those aspects, and you don't actually have to put much on your gear. You can run one attack speed roll on the ring that if you hit around 13.5% or more, you will actually reach a nice breakpoint with your puncture. So you want to try to go for that, or just leave out the attack speed entirely and have a life roll, for example. That is also fine. And you are at a lower breakpoint, but it's not a huge loss, and it still works out pretty well. So one attack speed roll with a little bit of investment is perfect here. Other than that, most of the other items actually go for, yeah, just kind of like straightforward stuff. We have rapid fire ranks, for example. On the amulet, you want to have some good passes, in particular Frigid Finesse. As I mentioned, this is like crowd control burst type of build. You actually have Cold Immune in there. For Cold Immune, you want to freeze enemies anyway. For example, for Frigid Finesse, you want to freeze enemies anyway. So this is really powerful passive. Weapon Mastery is also very good because this gives you extra crit damage. Since we always crit, you get 5% damage per point. This is a rather strong passive as well. And compared to Frigid Finesse, it also always works, not just when, for example, the boss is staggered, which is very nice. So this is really strong to have. But there are other passives as well. There's Exploit, there's Malice. They're a little bit weaker, but still okay to have. Here on the chest, you also want to make sure you have Dark Shroud ranks, or at least Subterfuge skill ranks, because Dark Shrouds are like the #1 defensive mechanic for rogues right now. You want to make sure you have that as much as possible. So trying to get a good roll here, masterworking that up is really helpful to make sure that you have more damage. And like this, you can get a lot of protection. It's very easy to trigger those Dark Shrouds. You see here they're not on the bar, but we have the Amber's aspect. And this gives us automatic Dark Shroud triggers from just attacking and with critical strikes. Since we have so much crit chance with the rapid fire shooting a lot of arrows, it's very easy to maintain those. So this is how we build defenses. And then the rest of the gear, you have to get a bit of resistances. So you see this here on the chest, for example, or here on the boots. You want to get like 2 resistance rolls usually. And then the rest you can do with your gems and the paragons. And you see here everything is capped. And we also have our armor cap here at 9.3k. This is also relatively easy to get with, for example, 1 greater roll here on the pants or so, or maybe 2 armor rolls early on or so. So you want to make sure you have that 9,230 armor at least. There are various ways of achieving that. If you look at those armor pieces here, you will see that there are a lot of different crowd control effects here. So we have to freeze, stun, immobilize, daze, and so on. Generally, I want to try to combine multiple different crowd controls because this allows you to stagger bosses just by attacking them pretty quickly. If you just stack the same one, it will not stagger that quickly because they build up kind of like a resistance to a certain crowd control effect. But you also want to make sure you have at least 1 stun roll, maybe even 2, I'd say, because of the retribution aspect. We actually put that on the neck, and you want to make sure that you trigger this sometimes when you attack, for example, elites as well, not just the staggered bosses. This is very powerful against bosses because right now it's actually double dipping, so you get 2 times the 45% bonus, and there's generally a really large gap between attacking a staggered boss and a non-staggered boss. So you have to make sure that whenever a boss is staggered, you will burst them down in that moment. So you want to try to get like 2 or 3 combos out during the stagger with a counters up, for example, on the boss as well, which slowly stacks up the extra damage taken, for example. And you get other benefits, for example, from the Paragons with the Deadly Ambush node, giving you extra damage. So you want to try to make use of that burst window as much as possible, because the gap is very large. And when the boss is not staggered, we'll have to wait, most likely for the next stagger phase to take it down. Your weapons look like this. You want, again, a lot of crit damage here. Crit damage, as I mentioned, for precision, very good. You can stack thousands of % of crit damage. You see here, this setup actually has 2,500%. So that's quite a lot. And this really scales the precision to the moon here, basically. So you get like a bonus of over 420%, for example, in this version here. This can go even higher if you really try. And this also means that if you ever get to 3 combo points, but somehow don't end up with 4 precision stacks, you'll actually not do any damage because this bonus is so ridiculous. You get guaranteed crit, and then you get like another ×5 damage multiplier on top of this. So this is why you want to make sure that you hit that 4. Maybe very early on when you don't really have any crit chance at all. Let's say you happen to just not have crit on a glove, not on a ring or anything. then it might not be such a bad idea to just do 4 punctures instead of 3 punctures every time until you can get like, maybe like 1 decent crit roll or so. You also have, for example, the Dark Shrouds here with the extra crit, so this can help you just to make that consistent. Now, for your weapons, you want to have your rapid fire projectiles cast twice as well. So in fact, here I put this on 2 different items and not on all 3. So here this is a 68%, and then here we have another 34%, reaching over 100%. You cannot get more than that. So this means that every single arrow will be doubled by having these 2 tempers here. Now this is somewhat difficult to achieve. You need like a really high roll and then double masterwork them on both the weapons. So this requires a bit of investment. Before that, you could also consider just putting the chance to cast twice on all 3 of your weapons, at least until the point where you can consistently reach, let's say, 90% plus from only 2 items. And then the third one is supposed to be Caltrops duration. Caltrops are a very powerful damage multiplier, because they stack up this 5% extra damage taken per second, and you see here with extra duration it can go up to 80% extra. And it also makes it so that you don't have to cast them so often, which is very helpful. So you can just walk up to the boss, do the Caltrops, do the entire first stagger phase, then do another Caltrops, and maybe before the second stagger do another one, for example. So you don't have to cast them that frequently, and this helps you just like dish out more damage overall, because they last longer and it's easier to maintain your buffs. It's easier to maintain your deadly ambush buff here, for example. We have that. So there are various benefits to Caltrops, and this is why you want to have 1 roll of Caltrops duration. But early on, you know, especially while you're still farming up your gear and not necessarily pushing very high, the bosses will probably just die relatively quickly anyway if you do, let's say, tier 100s or so. So it's not such a big deal there, but optimally you want to have 2 rapid fires and 1 Caltrops duration. Now let's talk about the uniques here real quick. We have the Scoundrel's Kiss. I mentioned this at the start. This is the new rapid fire unique, and this makes it actually shoot in this like parabolic trajectory, basically, where they lob up in the air and then come down in the ground and explode. So compared to the normal rapid fire where you just shoot arrows in a straight line, this is actually now a completely different play style. But the advantage is that this has recently been changed, and now you can always hit enemies even in close distance, right, in melee range. So this makes it a lot more console friendly than before, compared to previously where there was actually a dead zone, like close to a character, you could not hit anything, and it was kind of a problem here. So this has been changed, and now it's like consistent. You can hit anything at any distance. All the arrows fly in one spot and explode in AoE. So this gives you insane AoE potential. And as you saw in the clips at the start, I can just one-tap entire packs of this basically, so that's really cool. And here we have a Harlequin Crest. Now this is obviously hard to get because it's an uber unique, but it's also not required. It's a very strong item though, so you want to try to get this. Normally you can do it like an Undying here. You can also do, if you don't need this healing, you can do like Concussive Strikes, for example. There are a few options here, but this is like the early game choice, I would say. And then later you go for the Harlequin Crest. You get the extra ranks, it's extra damage. You get extra Dark Shroud ranks, so you get even more defense than just the life and the damage reduction on this thing. It's a very powerful item to have, so you want to try to have this as soon as possible. Now let's talk about the skill tree a little bit more. So we have the Rapid Fire here, and there is one upgrade called the Advanced Rapid Fire that gives you extra 30% crit damage for 5 seconds after evading. So evading kind of becomes part of your playstyle. You have to regularly evade to get this buff. And I tested this. This does not apply to arrows already in the air. So you can't shoot and then evade. You have to have the buff before you shoot. So this means that generally you want to try to kind of like walk into a pack or walk up to a pack, do an evade at the start, and then start shooting. Usually you can fit like 2 or 3 cycles before this buff expires. And the way that I do this most of the time is that I just kind of like evade away from a dead pack basically, and I will have 5 seconds of this buff, kind of walking up to the next pack, and then at some point I will do like 1, 2, 3 puncture, rapid fire, and then evade again, and kind of like stack the buff up for the next rotation. So that's kind of how I do that, and this works really well. This also means you want to time this a little bit. For example, when you see that the boss is about to be staggered, you want to do an evade before the stagger starts, so you don't lose valuable time during the burst window. And you also have to redo this once at the end of the stagger, or like in the middle of the stagger, so that you keep up this buff. So this is something to play around with. Other than that, we also have the cold imbue here, so I can say a few words about this. The main reason to run cold imbuement is for mixed cold imbuement. So you see here 20% extra damage against crouch roll enemies, double against frozen. So this synergizes very well also with the Frigid Finesse, for example, and cold imbuement itself can actually freeze enemies pretty easily. You just need 3 arrows because it chills for 45% per hit. If you have a leftover point somewhere, you can actually put 1 extra, then you'll be at 50, so you'll freeze after 2. But generally not really required, I would say. And this means that you easily proc all these freeze multipliers. We also have Frostbitten on the boots. Again, another freeze multiplier. Ignore the grenade lines. You only look at the bottom here, 25% extra damage. And you have a lot of burst against frozen enemies. So this is why we run Cold Imbuement for the 40% extra damage here. It also makes enemies vulnerable more often than not, which is very nice since we have so many arrows. We have actually a pretty consistent uptime here on just making enemies vulnerable. Plus we have the puncture for single target vulnerable, so we don't really need anything else besides this. And this means that you want to have a little bit of the Cold Imbue cast tempers. You see this here on Amulet and Ring. So I put a +3, this is just like a normal roll, upgraded for Masterworking without any crits. And here maybe you should go for 1 crit or so. This just makes it a bit more consistent because at least in the late game version, you actually have a bunch of attack speed. And you can potentially run out of those Cold Imbue charges. And for example, when you dash or shadow step, those 2 skills can also consume your imbues. So you want to make sure you don't run out, because without the imbuement, you will not really do much damage. You can still kill something, but you really want to have those Cold Imbuement tempers. And if you have +6 or +7 charges, which is very easy to get, then you'll basically have permanent Cold Imbuement, because you do roughly 1 rapid fire per 1.5 seconds or so. So with a 30 seconds cooldown, maybe a bit of cooldown reduction from the Harlequin, 12 seconds cooldown, 11.5 seconds cooldown, you will quite easily be able to do like 7 or 8 rapid fires in those 12 seconds and then use it again and you're fine. I have a few different versions here. There's also a speed farming setup and a bossing setup. So if you want to do like tormented bosses, for example, I used to run Shadow Imbuement for this, but since I have nerfed tormented bosses, you can basically just go for stagger and then burst them down. So you just kind of like wait for them to be staggered and that's basically the end of the fight. So Shadow Imbuement is not really necessary for this anymore. Speed farming, if you want to do any kind of like low tier content, Hell Tides or something, I guess you could consider also going Shadow Imbuement there, but ultimately I just kept the Cold Imbuement there as well. Rapid Fire in general is not really a great, like for example, Hell Tide build, and I do recommend just go for Barrage, for example. It's actually not very hard to switch from this setup to a working Hell Tide build with Barrage. Basically, all you have to do is you swap the Rapid Fire to Barrage, and then you swap your Cold Imbuement stuff to Shadow Imbuement, and also your Cold Imbuement tempers, for example. Make like another ring, make another amulet, put Shadow Imbuement casts there, and you have a formidable Hell Tide farmer or like any kind of low content farmer, because the Rapid Fire just doesn't really feel that great. Yeah, so this is kind of what you can do. And I can also link the Barrage Planner, for example, down in the description. It's a very similar setup. You need the same stats. You need all the same stuff, basically. The Paragon, you can just keep it as it is. And this works much better if you want to do actual Hell Tide farming, for example. It's just like, 2-3 different aspects, the different tempers, so that's it. Now, lastly, let's talk about the Paragons here real quick. So we have a 7-board setup. And we have 6 glyphs in total. So this is a rather defensive setup that I've made here because, again, I'm playing hardcore, so I like to be kind of tanky. You see here we have like 60,000 life. You can definitely tweak this a little bit if you feel too tanky. You can go with less. You can definitely get away with 50k or even less, even a high tier push, for example, and try to squeeze out a bit more damage, for example. But yeah, we have a lot of like non-physical synergies here. For example, we have Canny, it's non-physical damage. We have Eldritch Bounty here. This is extra damage for our imbued skills. And we have a bunch of other kind of like important multipliers and glyphs here. So Control Glyph is very nice. Again, has the frozen synergies. We have a No Witness here with Diminish. This gives us extra damage reduction against physical. And we have lots of life here. So I like putting a rare buffing glyph or a magic buffing glyph on this board. Very powerful. We have Turf here because you're generally kind of close to enemies. Because now that they've changed Scoundrel's Kiss, you can actually play this kind of like in melee range. Most of the time, you don't necessarily want to be in melee range just to get this little bit of damage buff here, but it is a nice extra defensive choice. And we have Fluidity. So this gives you another a bit of energy regeneration, which is kind of secondary, but also 10% extra damage after using an agility skill. And you have 3 of them on your bar, so it's very easy to keep this up. And lastly, Cunning Stratagem. So what you need to know about this one is, a lot of people don't actually know exactly what it does. Well, the non-damage combo point effect of Rapid Fire is that you increase the number of arrows that you fire. Baseline Rapid Fire casts 5 arrows, and then with one combo it goes to 6, then it goes to 7, and then it goes to 8 if you don't have that node. So if you remove that here, you'll see that. So it's 6, 7, 8. And then this is the non-damage effect, basically. So you get +3 arrows and then you got plus 33% of that. So the tooltip says it goes to 9 arrows. What it actually does is it actually goes to 10 arrows for whatever reason. It just gives you an extra arrow with rapid fire and with barrage as well. So in case you didn't know that, so this is actually a relatively powerful node. We get plus 25% arrows basically, going from 8 to 10 when you have 3 combo points. And since you do that all the time, this is a really strong node to pick up here. And lastly, here's the Deadly Ambush. So again, this is a huge damage buff when you have your traps. So the caltrops up, for example, on the boss. Generally, I don't really use caltrops much outside of the boss fight, at least for like farming tiers. If you're like pushing, let's say 120 plus or something like that, you definitely want to throw down the caltrops to get those damage buffs. You either get the caltrops buff itself and then also the Deadly Ambush. And if you want to be a bit more offensive, you can also, for example, replace the turf glyph with the ambush glyph. So at least on tiers where you actually use them regularly, this is another 10% damage buff here, because as I mentioned, turf, the DR, is not really required anyway. So you can squeeze out a bit more damage here. This is actually something that I might be doing when I go and, for example, try like 130 plus or so with this setup. And that also concludes this rapid fire guide. So hope you enjoyed this. Personally, I'm quite excited to try more of this. I've only been doing just a little bit, and I want to see if I can do it like 130 or even higher when I have the time to push again once I have fully set up my character. Right now, I'm still working on a bunch of gear, so a little bit of is missing there, but I'll keep you guys updated about what I can actually achieve with this. Quite excited. Hope you had liked this guide here. Wish you good luck with the rapid fire rogue, and see you guys next time.